Where is Pep Chavarría? I'm not going to lie, it looks like the protracted deal for the relatively cheap Spanish left-back looked for by Xabi Alonso in particular is starting to turn into a bit of a saga. Welcome, Blue Believers, to another episode of the Stamford Sync, where we are syncing up with everything Chelsea FC. And today that means we're going to do two things. We're going to ask the question, where is Pep Chavarría? And then we're going to have a little look at, if we do get it over the line eventually, is he an upgrade on Marco Correa, or are we looking at a completely different profile of player? But before we get into the comparison, let's just look at the news. Pice posted this yesterday pertaining to the Pep Chavarría saga. Chelsea were led to believe a bid in the region of £12.8 million would be enough to sign Chavarría, but Rayo Vallecano are believed to now want closer to 21.3 mil. Chelsea are not willing to overpay and feel the goalposts have been moved during negotiations. So when this first happened, it wasn't that long after we'd only put in the 8 mil bid for Granit Xhaka, and it was a little bit like, here we go again. And it has been a little bit strange to say that this has been going on for so long, and it doesn't seem to be that amount of money. But the difference is Sunderland came out and said, no, you're absolutely not having Granit Xhaka, and they just closed the door on us completely. That isn't what happened with the Pep Chavarría situation. It seemed like there was the interest was genuine. The talks have been ongoing for a little while, and as early as yesterday, it sounded like we were going to put in this 21.3 mil bid. But then this came out, which I guess kind of makes sense, but it's just like, in a world that we've spent like £70 million on Mudryk, 17 million pounds on David Washington, and all of these other massive transfer flops. I did a big video about it the other day, ranking all 61 of Blue Co signings. Go and check that one out if you haven't already. And I get it in terms of like the percentages, right? You're talking like 70-80% on what you were potentially led to believe was the price you were going to pay for him. But at the same time, if Xabi Alonso really wants him, let's just go and get him. But today there was a news update from Graham Bailey, who posted this. Chelsea have warned Rayo Vallecano that they are prepared to walk away from negotiations for Pep Chavarría unless the Spanish club reduce their asking price. Team Talk understands. So is it really like, who else are we going to go for? You know, I mean, I guess it takes us back to the list of left backs that we looked at the beginning, just after Marco Correa left. You know, that Lewis Hall potentially still on the market, Maxi Araujo potentially still on the market. There are players around, but they're all going to cost a lot more than the 20 mil that they want for Pep Chavarría. I guess in the grand scheme of things, the other targets that we're looking at, albeit they'd be more expensive, their sell-on value and you get longer out of them or whatever. You know, Pep Chavarría has just turned 28 years old. So, you know, you're only looking at 1 or 2 years of him maybe left at the top level, being that, as we're going to get into with his stats in the moment, he seems to be a runner. So that's where we are with the news at the moment. It's sounding like, based on what we're seeing from the tweetings, that Chelsea were led to believe that they'd be able to get this deal over the line for a certain amount of money. But the president, who is really involved in this negotiation, the president of the club, Rayo Vallecano, apparently keeps on moving the goalposts. And now they are asking further and further and further for his release clause to be triggered, which again is something that's changed in terms of the price, because it was like a €50 million release clause, which is like 40 million quid. That was what came out a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, or can't remember when it was. But now all of a sudden the release clause is 21.3 mil. So it's just getting a bit scrappy, isn't it? It's just getting a bit scrappy. And I just think, yes, I get it in terms of the percentage. You know, it's almost double at the end of the day what they were initially thinking they were going to pay for him. But in terms of the money that we've already wasted, and if this is someone who's going to come in and reinforce Xabi Alonso's football, then let's just do it, don't you think? And guys, if you've made it this far into today's episode of the Stamford Sync, please do me the distinct honour of liking and sharing the video, subscribe to the channel, or just roast me in the comments, whatever gets you through your day. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little look at, if we get Pep Chavarría, which it could change at any second at this point, is he actually an upgrade on Marco Correa based on his last season, or is he just a completely different kind of player? So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at their general player profiles and the heat maps. You know me, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I love a heat map. So the general, both obviously Spanish left backs. Pep Chavarría is 28 years old. Marco Correa has just turned 27. So a little bit older, a bit more experienced, but has played the majority of his football obviously in Spain. Height, 174 centimetres for Pep Chavarría and 175 for Marco Correa. Marco Correa already was not the tallest guy, so we're not looking for height in this department apparently. Market value, 9.7 mil euros. This is according to SofaScore, by the way, and that maybe reinforces why we thought 12 mil was an alright bid. And obviously with Marco Correa, 52 million euros, which is actually what was paid for him. So obviously there's something in that where we're looking at the player profile and what he's worth, but Rayo Vallecano are very much like, we only want to sell him if the release clause is triggered. Obviously, Chavarría played for Vallecano last season, and Marco Correa played for Chelsea in their respective seasons, based on all of their combined statistics on SofaScore. Pep Chavarría got a 6.88 and Marco Correa got a 6.66, the number of the beast. Ooh, that was a bad omen, wasn't it? That was a bad omen. So, already, before we've got into anything, based on statistics which don't tell the whole story, right? Because like, what I'm not saying is, and I'm probably not going to say this at all to be honest, is that Chavarría is a better left back than Marco Correa, but based on his performance, SofaScore, the amalgamation of the statistics altogether, SofaScore rates that Pep Chavarría had a better season than Marco Correa. So now we move on to the heat maps. And this tells you, it seems subtle, but I guess it's actually not, is it? Pep Chavarría is definitely a lot more married to the byline than Marco Correa was, and you can see Marco Correa is getting a lot further in field. Bearing in mind that he spent so much time, especially under Enzo Maresca, inverting it into that midfield spot. Pep Chavarría is not ignoring the midfield at all by any stretch, though. He is getting involved there a little bit. I don't know if that's something that we're going to do. I don't think we're buying him to be, and we'll see this in the stats later, I don't necessarily think we're buying Pep Chavarría if we buy Pep Chavarría to be an inverting midfielder. You can just see from the heat maps that Pep Chavarría is kind of thinner and wider, which means he's getting close to the bottom, closer to the top. Looks like he's getting in relatively good crossing positions. Marco Correa, what you can see is obviously, as well as obviously often drifting into that midfield, he's also spending more time getting into the box as well, which Chavarría isn't really doing at all. So it looks like Chavarría is a high and wide left back at the end of the day, and Marco Correa was a bit of a Swiss Army player, a bit of a journeyman who went all over the shop in terms of the field. So nothing to say if anyone's better or worse. It just, like, when you think about Palestra, who we've just bought as well, his heat map was quite similar, albeit even thinner than Pep Chavarria's. So what we're looking at is Xabi Alonso wants his fullbacks to stay wide and get high and not spend loads of time inverting into midfield and not necessarily spending loads of time getting into the box either. So I never normally do this. I always start with passing and shooting stats, but you know what? We're talking about defenders. So let's have a look at the defense. So still on the left Chavarría, on the right Cucurella. We're going to look at, these are per 90 stats, by the way, apart from the goals, which we'll get into right at the end. All of these stats are per 90 to try and keep it as fair as possible. Duels contested, Pep Chavarría contests 8.5 duels per game to Marco Correa's 7.6. So, one for Chavarría in the defence already. Now, I've mentioned it a little bit before, but one caveat before I carry on about all of this is Marco Correa had a bad season last season, especially towards the end, right? And Pep Chavarría is obviously coming off the back of a very good one. Actually, technically, his SofaScore rating was lower last season than it was the season before, but either way, Pep Chavarría is being considered a hot property because we're in for buying him, whereas Marco Correa obviously has gone to Real Madrid. But at the same time, I think it would be disingenuous to say that he had his best season last season, because he clearly didn't. But at the same time, you can only upgrade on what's in front of you, right? So if we're, that's kind of the premise of all of this, is that we know Marco Correa had a worse season last season, and does Pep Chavarría improve on a bad Marco Correa, essentially? Anyway, on we go to tackles made, both 1.9 per game apiece. So relatively similar. Like, I would say one more duel contested per game is actually quite good in terms of the defensive work for Chavarría there. They're attempting the same amount of tackles. Take-ons completed. I don't necessarily know why this is in the defensive stat, but it is what it is. This is a massive difference here, and again shows you that Pep Chavarría is probably closer to the profile of Marco Palestra than he is of Marco Correa. 0.7 take-ons completed per game, which is nowhere near as high as Palestra is, but that's nearly one a game to Marco Correa's 0.1. So Marco Correa basically never trying to take on his man. And then when you go on to the success rate of that, 39.13% take-on success rate for Pep Chavarría, 33.33 for Marco Correa. So Marco Correa is essentially managing one take-on every 10 games, and that means that in 30 games, I think he managed one. I think that's me trying to do the quick maths in my head. But whereas Pep Chavarría obviously is essentially trying to do one per game with a 40% success rate. So every 10 games, well, no, it's not quite one, is it? It's a bit lower than one. So call it every 15 games, he's managing 4 take-ons essentially. But that's obviously massively in front of Marco Correa and closer to the profile of Marco Palestra as well. Fouls won, 1.2 fouls won per game for Marco Palestra, and that makes sense because he's attempting more take-ons. But to say that, Marco Correa still being fouled one time a game. Anyway, aerial duels contested, this is a weird one, I guess, because in your head, I guess we're actually talking about two relatively short players, aren't we? But only 1.9 per game contested for Pep Chavarría to 2.3 for Marco Correa. So Marco Correa is just a bundle of energy, and he's, dogged and aggressive, and we love that about him. It's not a huge difference, though. It's not a huge difference. That's what, every 4 games he's contesting one more aerial duel than Pep Chavarría is. But also it's backed up there with the success. The aerial duel success of Pep Chavarría is only 40.74%, with Marco Correa's being 52.94%, which is actually great. So Pep Chavarría doesn't necessarily help us in the box and stuff like that. When we're defending corners and set pieces and stuff, that's not necessarily what his wheelhouse is going to be. Duels won, again, quite different, but Pep Chavarría comes out in front with a 4.4 duels won per game to Marco Correa's 4. So you could argue it's an upgrade, but at the same time, they're very similar, that it's more of just like you getting the same sort of thing. Ground success, again, really similar, so they're kind of even in this, really. 54.31% ground duel success rate for Pep Chavarría, 52.83 for Marco Correa. Either way, they're both winning half of their ground duels, so we're not losing anything or gaining anything in that respect, so that's good in itself. Interceptions, 1.1 apiece. So this is actually really even across the board, to be completely honest. The main ones being, Pep Chavarría is actually in front in general, but like I say, with the duels one, like, they're basically 50-50 on that one. The duels contested is close. Marco Correa was, I guess relatively a decent amount in front of the aerial duels, but Pep Chavarría is getting a lot more of his take-ons, and completing a lot more of his take-ons. So that, again, shows you that that's the kind of profile of player that we're looking for with Pep Chavarría compared to Marco Correa, where he wasn't banging down the byline and trying to take on his man all the time. Obviously, he was inverting into midfield and playing at centre-back and all this stuff. Pep Chavarría, like I say, what I'm seeing from this seems closer to Marco Palestra stylistically in the profile of the player that he is. But either way, across the board, I guess you would argue defensively, last season at the very least, they both had relatively similar output. So we'll move on to the passing now, because this is one thing we remember about Marco Correa. He was a very good passer. Chances created, 1 per game for Pep Chavarría and 1.3 for Marco Correa. So again, not a massive difference, but that means that every 3 games, essentially, you're getting an extra chance created out of Marco Correa at this point, but that could change depending on how Pep Chavarría is used, I guess. Passes attempted 43 to 48, so again, very similar, and that's interesting because, to my knowledge, Vallecano weren't exactly like a possession-based heavy team. If you know any more about them than I do, get that in the comments. I'd love to know if that's the case, but if, that's not a huge amount of passes attempted per game difference anyway, bearing in mind that Marco Correa was spending so much more time in midfield. Passing accuracy, 84.59% for Pep Chavarría to Marco Correa's 87.73%. That is reasonably good for both of them. Not really a stick to beat Pep Chavarría with. Obviously, Marco Correa is a little bit in front of there, but we know he's a tidy passer. But at the same time, you don't expect Chavarría to be getting into the midfield as much, where he obviously won't be as attempting as many passes, so it's not necessarily a big part of his game. And to say that, his passing stats are okay. Long passes attempted, 4.8 per game for Pep Chavarría to 3.1 for Marco Correa, so that's nearly 2 more. That's like 1.4, nearly 1.5 more passes per game, long passes, which is good. Long pass accuracy, though, 40.14% for Chavarría and 47.25% for Marco Correa. So Marco Correa was quality over quantity kind of guy. Pep Chavarría is attempting a few more, but not getting as many of them across. But 4 in 10, I guess, to nearly 5 in 10. Like, again, it's quite close. Not so far in front that it's a worry. Crosses attempted. This is another one that backs up probably the way that we're looking to use Chavarría versus Marco Correa. 3.3 crosses attempted per game for Pep Chavarría, 1.5 for Marco Correa. That's just a byline, fullback kind of wing-back thing, really, isn't it? And, we haven't had loads of really good crossers recently. Who's the best crosser in the team at the moment? Reece James. Reece James is the best crosser in the team, but he's not been playing in positions where it's easy for him to get out there. So this is another thing I think we're going to see from Palestra and Chavarría together. And if you think about Jeremy Frimpong and Alejandro Grimaldo from Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen, they were both really tidy crossers as well. So over double, essentially. Pep Chavarría is attempting over double, but at the same time he's also when we move on to the accuracy, it doesn't make for amazing reading. 16.49% crossing accuracy for Pep Chavarría and 30.23 for Marco Correa. So weirdly enough, they're both completing the same amount of crosses because Pep Chavarría is attempting more and is successful in half the amount, and Marco Correa is attempting half the amount but he's successful in double the amount. So weirdly there, is this a case of like having the players to get on the end of those balls? I'm not really sure what goes into that. Again, let's have a chat about it in the comments, but what we know about Pep Chavarría is he's going to try more crosses, but maybe that success rate is something that could be brought up because 16% crossing accuracy is pretty bad. Through balls, 0.3 per game for Pep Chavarría and 0.1 for Marco Correa, which is surprising actually. I would have thought that would have been a bit more of Marco Correa's game. But again, because the number's so low, it's not necessarily something you expect to see from either of them. And I imagine with Pep Chavarría in particular, he's probably going to be spending more time getting high and wide. So, weird one. Marco Correa comes out on top in terms of quality, and it seems like Pep Chavarría generally, apart from the short passes, is just attempting more, right? Because he's attempting more crosses and he's attempting more long passes. But Marco Correa comes out on top in terms of the accuracy. So I guess this one kind of has to go to Marco Correa in terms of the passing quality in the grand scheme of things. Now, I hope that that's not a worry, but it feels like it might be. And then we'll finish up by moving on to the G&A and some of the other stats. So all of these stats in the white are from Squawka, and I find it interesting, a couple of these other stats that they leave at the end, because I feel like they should be in other places. G&A, each scored 1 goal apiece. What I do know about Pep Chavarría is that 1 goal that he scored was from outside the box, so that's cool, I guess. And that was like, he scored 1 goal outside the box from 13 attempts. So he's attempting to score from outside the box a lot. He scored once. Isn't that similar to what we had from Gusto? Oh, I don't know about that. But look, at the end of the day, you're not necessarily... I guess this is a weird one, isn't it? Because I was just about to say you're not necessarily expecting your fullbacks to score a lot of goals, but then we go back to Xabi Alonso's Bayer Leverkusen, and they were scoring a lot of goals, and Marco Palestra was 5 GA or something for the season, not exactly amazing, and we're looking at 1 goal, 2 assists with Pep Chavarría, 1 goal, 4 assists from Marco Correa. So Marco Correa definitely comes out on front in terms of quality in the position that he was being played, which is probably going to be different from Pep Chavarría's at the end of the day. And the thing is, with Pep Chavarría as well, this isn't an outlier season for him, for the good or the bad. Like, I looked through, the last, about 6-7 seasons, something like that on SofaScore. 3 GA in a season is his max he's ever got. So he's never, as of right now, he's never got that much more. So we'll move on to the other, and then I'll summarise. Total cards per game, 0.2 to Marco Correa, 0.3. I should have left them at not as per 90 actually. But either way, that's not necessarily a bad thing because the number is lower. Therefore, it is less likely that the Pep Chavarría is going to get a card than Marco Correa is. Probably means it's just not quite as aggressive and dogged. Ball recoveries, this is really good. 4.8 per game for Pep Chavarría, only 3.8 for Marco Correa. And possession lost 14 times per game for Pep Chavarría and 8.9 times per game for Marco Correa. But that kind of makes sense when we link it back to the take-on stat, where essentially Pep Chavarría is completing 7 times more of the take-ons in a season than Marco Correa is. So it makes sense that he's going to lose possession a little bit more often. After deep diving into the stats, and now look, I'll preface this because look, stats don't tell the whole story. I know stats don't tell the whole story, but I don't know if any of you guys did, but I did not religiously watch Rayo Vallecano last season, and I don't necessarily think that just watching highlight reels on YouTube is the best way to get, because they always put the best moments up, don't they? All the worst moments. So that's why I think the stats help to tell a story at the end of the day. The story to me that these stats in particular are telling us is that Marco Correa is a very quality passer, and his role was obviously not that of that kind of byline-y attacking wing-back kind of thing, and we know that because he was playing in midfield and stuff. Pep Chavarría definitely seems to have more of the profile a lot closer to Marco Palestra compared to, if you think about both of the fullbacks that we've been using outside of Reece James in Marco Correa and Malo Gusto, both of those guys were inverting midfieldy type fullbacks, weren't they? But Palestra and Pep Chavarría both seem to be very much high and wide wing-back types. Now, Pep Chavarría, I don't know, I think he played left-back for the most part. I'm not sure if they ever dipped into a back 5, but maybe some of those attacking stats are increased by the fact that there be an extra centre-back behind him, means he's not as expected to do as much defensive work, so maybe that helps him get up the quality of his passing and his attacking output a little bit. So I would have to say, by looking at the stats in general, because it's about the quality really more than the quantity. Like, you're going to get more crosses, you're going to get more take-ons, you're going to get more attacking actions by the looks of things from a Pep Chavarría than you are a Marco Correa. But with Marco Correa, there was quality there. His passes were really good. He obviously was getting more assists, scored the same amount of goals. The defensive work actually probably falls in Pep Chavarria's favour in terms of, well, his defensive stats were mostly better across the board. Marco Correa was only significantly better at aerial duels. Everything else kind of fell in Pep Chavarria's favour there. So we are getting a better defender. We're getting a guy that tries and attempts more sorts of attacking passes with like crosses and long balls, but with less success in his last season at the very least than Marco Correa did. So it's really mixed, man. It's a bit of a balanced one. Either way, it's not, by the looks of the news, it's not nailed on that he's even going to come. I think, yeah, for me, I just think it's getting silly at this point, isn't it? It's getting silly. Like, I'm not worried about the transfers themselves taking a long time, because I would rather that we take the time and get the right transfers. And the thing is as well, when Xabi Alonso was at Bayer Leverkusen, he didn't go out and try and buy all superstars and stuff. Like, he created a team out of nearly men and, already runs that have had big moments in their careers but kind of tailed off. The likes of Grimaldo, for instance, Granit Xhaka obviously had his opportunity at Arsenal. And he turned those guys into absolute beasts, mentality monsters. And the thing with Pep Chavarría, what this says to me is I don't think he's going to come in to be the starting left back. If I'm completely honest, the more and more I think about it, it feels like that role was made for Giovanni Kenda in terms of take-ons, runs. He's a really creative player. He got loads of assists for Sporting Lisbon over his last few seasons in general. And we also, there's the Valentin Barco conversation to have as well. Is he going to be used as a midfielder? Is he going to be a left-back option as well? For me, we're not actually bringing in Pep Chavarría to replace Marco Correa. We're bringing him in to reinforce the option, but we need something different over there, right? Because I don't think we're going to see the same type of left-back situation that we've been seeing for the last few years, where they've been inverting into the midfield all the time. I'd be surprised. I did a video about it a little while ago, how it actually could make sense to start in a 4 and attacking a 3, but that wouldn't be inverting into midfield. That'd be pushing, like that'd be starting Yoro Hato at a left-back and starting Palestra at right-back, and then pushing Palestra up into a wing-back position, which brings someone else into the inside 10, probably an Esteval or a Cole Palmer, for instance. So look, we're getting closer and closer every single day to finding out exactly what Xabi Alonso is going to do with this team. Obviously, he did the the press conference. I haven't covered it because everyone's covered it. So it's like I'll give you my quick summary of the Xabi Alonso press conference as well. Good to see him. Good to see him talking. Just exactly kind of what I expected, to be honest. Like, he was never going to say anything curt about Enzo Fernandez or the transfer situation or who's staying and who's going. He was always just going to say, Chelsea's a big club. We want to win lots of trophies here. He got dodged questions about, like, can you win in your first season and stuff. It's ridiculous questions, man. The reporters really didn't do a very good job in the grand scheme of things, I don't think, because one of them even was just like, he's being unveiled for Chelsea, and one of them was like, oh, what do you think about Spain in the World Cup? It's like, mate, we're here for Chelsea. What are you talking about? I'm happy that Xabi Alonso's on board. Nicholas Jackson is going to get the opportunity, but that's not news. Everyone's talking about the Nicholas Jackson thing like it's news, but it's like, that's literally just what we've been hearing for absolutely ages. And yeah, so, it's just one of those, isn't it? Like, he didn't, if anything, it's a good thing he didn't come in and have like a Liam Rosenior style press conference where he said all these flamboyant, lovely, wonderful things and, made all these big promises and stuff. I like the fact that he's kind of playing it a little bit more chill, because it's like, look, whatever, man, let's just get to work. And that was kind of the main message throughout it, is there's a lot of work to do. Chelsea's a big club. I'm going to work with the sporting directors. We've got targets. He's not getting drawn into conversations about winning the league or anything like that. That's what we need for the time being. We need to allow him just to get out there on the pitch, do his work, and the results will tell the story at the end of the day. Liam Rosenior tried too hard to put himself first, and I don't mean that in an arrogant way. Like, I think he was quite good at like deflecting, criticism from players and stuff for the most part, but he kind of put himself front and centre, and to his own detriment at the end of the day, because he said a couple of weird things with the man aging and all this and that and the other. Didn't do him very well. I think Maresca talked too much about his philosophy, and Xabi Alonso's kind of avoided all of that. He's avoided making himself the target. He's avoided making any of the players the target, and it was a bit of a boring press conference, but I actually think that's probably the best thing that he could have done. So that's my little summary on the Xabi Alonso press conference. Either way, I'm just excited to see what he does with the squad. And yeah, to wrap up, Marco Correa versus Pep Chavarría. For a backup, for a rotation option, I think the fact that that he's not very far away from Cucurella in the grand scheme of things is great. If you think about it that way, this is actually the perfect kind of guy to have as a squad player. If we were talking about Pep Chavarría as coming in, being the first team left back all of the time, and then not looking at the likes of Giovanni Quenda or Valentin Barco or Yoro Hato potentially, if he was just coming in, if we were looking at paying 60 mil for him, for instance, and it was like, yeah, cool, he comes in and he's the guy, then this would be a little bit more worrying. But the fact that we're only looking to, but even if it is 20 mil, even if we play his release clause for him, that's still really cheap for a squad player at Chelsea in the last few years. When you think about the 50 million for Jamie Gittins and there's all the crazy amounts of money we've spent. So that's kind of how I'm framing it at the moment. Obviously, time will tell. Maybe Chavarría comes in and is absolutely phenomenal. The Xabi Alonso effect takes hold and he becomes incredible. But just looking at the squad at the moment and the other options that we've got and the guys he's already working with, because that's the thing, is if Pep Chavarría doesn't come in, if we haven't bought a new left back by the time the first game comes, we're going to have to use someone that we've got. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I'm not thinking about him now as actually coming in to play Smart Cucurella. I'm thinking about it very much as he's going to be a rotational left back. And with that, the fact that his stats aren't miles behind Marc Cucurella is actually a really good thing. So guys, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to know. Do you think we should just pay the 20 mil? Do you think the Rayo Vallecano are being a little bit cheeky? Do you think it's like, oh, you can get him for 12 mil? Actually, we want 20. Should we, is it a fair thing to walk away from the deal at this point? Or should we actually just go pay the 20 mil, get the guy in the squad, focus on the next guy, which we're all hoping is the like of a Maxence Lacroix or an Adam Wharton, or, the news has come out in the deal sheet today that we are still looking at Morgan Rogers. Despite the money and the, all of the competition there will be for his signature, Chelsea have not dropped out of that race yet. So obviously there's loads of other targets for us to go on to. So yeah, let me know what you think about Pep Chavarría, Marc Cucurella, the situation. Tell me what you think about Xabi Alonso's first press conference while you're there as well. Nice one, guys. I hope you all have an absolutely wicked day, and I'll catch up with you very, very soon. Take it easy. Peace.